Hello, I'm Kirk LaPointe, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Canadian Press, and this is Week's End. On today's program, the Palestinian factor and its impact on next week's historic Arab-Israeli peace conference in Madrid. A look at the plight of Cambodian refugees who have faced forced resettlement by the Khmer Rouge, and an arts talk on the 1990s male, a bumbling idiot a la Homer Simpson or Iron John. But first, our national panel, the Cambodian Peace Treaty in Paris. In Paris this week, ministers from 19 nations signed a UN-sponsored peace treaty designed to end 13 years of civil war in Cambodia. Mark Austin of ITN prepared this report on Wednesday, the day of the signing.
In Cambodia, they're starting to smile again. The capital, Phnom Penh, is preparing for peace. All around are signs of rebuilding. The royal palace on the banks of the Mekong River is undergoing a lavish facelift. Next month, Prince Norodom Sihanouk, the former king, will return. He'll be the figurehead leader in the new Cambodia. It's the old Cambodia that people will now try to forget, the 4 years of genocidal rule under Pol Pot and his Khmer Rouge. The entire population was force-marched into the countryside to begin society again. More than 1 million people died in what became known as the killing fields. In 1979, Vietnam took control of Cambodia. There followed 12 years of civil war, with Khmer Rouge and other guerrilla groups fighting to regain power. A war of slaughter today's peace accord is designed to end. But the Khmer Rouge still control vast areas of western Cambodia, and despite the UN plan for disarmament and demobilization, there are fears they'll simply hide their weapons and conceal their true numbers. And in the vast refugee camps along the border with Thailand, the Khmer Rouge are already disrupting the peace plan. 350,000 Cambodians are waiting to return home under UN supervision. But Khmer Rouge soldiers are trying to force them to areas they control to guarantee votes in forthcoming elections. This British nurse who works in the camps told us armed soldiers come at night to intimidate the refugees.
They're very afraid. On the surface, they're carrying on as normal, like I said, but if you talk to them, they'll tell you that they are very afraid. They definitely want to go back with the United Nations. They don't want to go back with Khmer Rouge.
If the soldiers come with guns and say it is time to go back, they will have to go back, even if the land they're going back to is unsafe. It's heavily infested with mines. It's a very terrible malaria area. There's no water, there's no food.
The very name Khmer Rouge still strikes fear into most Cambodians, and in the coming months, the Khmer Rouge claim that it's finally embraced democracy and given up the gun will be severely tested. Mark Austin, ITN, on the Thai-Cambodian border.
The terror in the refugee camps controlled by the Khmer Rouge has not subsided since the signing of the peace treaty. Brian McConaghy is a Canadian who's been in constant touch with people in these refugee camps since he organized a recent medical shipment to Cambodia. He was last in Cambodia 3 months ago. Brian McConaghy joins me now from Vancouver. Mr. McConaghy, French President François Mitterrand said this week that Cambodia can now resume its place in the world. Just how isolated and out of contact was Cambodia?
Cambodia has been one of the most isolated countries in the world, both politically and economically. There have been very few embassies from the West in Cambodia, but the only one that was outside the Soviet bloc would have been the Indian embassy. When I was first in Cambodia, I was quite surprised by that. The isolation has been quite extensive.
In signing this peace treaty, there seems to be a fundamental assumption that the Khmer Rouge will suddenly change its stripes. Is that a correct assumption to make, in your view?
I find that a little hard to believe. I think we have to look at the Khmer Rouge record in the recent years. That's subsequent to their power when they basically ran the killing fields. There are clear indications from the refugee camps that they control that although they try to put on a good show for the West, the fundamental ideology that runs this organization has not changed. There is a very considerable degree of fear within particularly Site 8, the largest camp they control. This was evident as I walked around that camp in comparison with other camps controlled by various other factions.
Do the Cambodian people know something that the United Nations people don't?
I'm not sure that the Cambodians know anymore, but they certainly have experienced more, and this is the ultimate criteria in determining the amount of fear they have. They are the ones that are going to suffer under the Khmer Rouge if the Khmer Rouge come back to power. They are the ones that have already suffered to an incredible degree. It's very hard to comprehend in a Western context just what these people have suffered in terms of both isolation and manipulation and control. There's no real Western comparison for this.
What kind of fear is whipped up by the Khmer Rouge on a daily basis? I mean, how would my life change if I were a Cambodian living amid this kind of reign?
At the moment in Site 8, at least when I was there was a real sense in which you had to be very careful talking to Westerners. Other camps I was in, the children were very friendly. They would run up to you and ask for candy, or they would want to pull on my beard. They would play all kinds of tricks that way. Whereas going into Site 8 controlled by the Khmer Rouge, if the children were not with their parents, they would be inclined to run away and cry. There's an inherent fear of Westerners. The Khmer Rouge control quite strictly how the people in the camp communicate. This has been particularly true in this past few days, where the Khmer Rouge have indicated that it's once again not appropriate to read any foreign literature. It's not appropriate to talk to UN officials. They have been very, very strict in recreating some of the terminology we were hearing out of the ears of the killing fields from 1975 to 1978. So the future is potentially very ominous for these people. The signs we've been seeing are one of withdrawing of the people back into the jungle, where they have no isolation whatsoever with the outside world, and therefore the Khmer Rouge can do what they want. This is being done apparently in spite of the peace agreement, which stipulates quite categorically that repatriation of all the people from these camps should be done by the UN officials only, and the Khmer Rouge are not to have control of that. Yet they seem to be pushing ahead with their own policies in this regard.
Brian, were you prepared as a Westerner when you brought in medical supplies for what it is that you encountered in Cambodia? I mean, can anything really prepare you for that?
Not really. The country is sufficiently isolated that it has many idiosyncrasies that are very difficult for a Westerner to get used to. The sheer level of fear that I think still exists underneath the general day-to-day life was clearly evident to me. I used to ask questions of various officials I met of what their plans were for the future, and I would always get sort of a strange look until eventually I met an official that spoke sufficiently good English that they said, "We have no future. We live from day to day." Things like that I found quite shocking, as well as the poverty. The level of hygiene is zero. Every time I go into Cambodia, I come out sick. That's even if I go in for a short period, such as a week. It's a tragic place that is not able to rebuild itself, given that all the engineers, architects, anyone with education was largely murdered by the Khmer Rouge. So it's a society trying to rebuild from absolutely nothing.
And there must also have to be a construction of a whole generation of people who have known nothing but encampment. I mean, there is 20 years of history of encampment here. What are these people going to have to learn in order to just basically cope day to day with the world?
This is one of the big problems for those in the refugee camps, in that although originally farmers, they have either not been farming for so long or their kids have not learned to farm, that when they're sent back to Cambodia, they have basically no skills. As far as the people of the camps are concerned, rice comes from a sack, not from a field. Therefore, there's going to be real problems with the repatriation, even with the United Nations taking charge of it. However, if the Khmer Rouge, as they seem to be intent on, start to move the people into jungle areas they have chosen, the indication of one of the areas I've heard about is that there's no water supply. They have cleared the jungle, and that's all they've done. Therefore, there's no resources at all for these people. We're talking about 43,000 people that are going to be moved here. They're moving into an area of the jungle that is heavily mined, that was fought over from 1986 to 1989. So there's no infrastructure to support these people, and they're going to have to forage for food in the jungle far and wide, and this whole jungle is laced with thousands and thousands of mines. So the potential is just ominous for these people.
Yeah, that's an enormous personal and logistical problem. But there must also be a political problem in this repatriation. I mean, what could go wrong with this whole process that the UN is now going to oversee?
Well, there are several possibilities. The most disturbing, I think, is the Khmer Rouge ability to hold people in areas that the United Nations don't have access to. Within the peace accord, there are guidelines set forth for an election. So there's supposed to be a free election within the country, through all zones of the country, and people will choose their political leadership. However, if the Khmer Rouge have the ability to hold huge quantities of people in areas that are exclusive to them, everyone is going to be far too frightened to vote for anybody else other than the Khmer Rouge. So this is a method of the Khmer Rouge producing an enforced political constituency.
Yeah. Knowing what you know about the country, are you optimistic at all?
I'm optimistic in the short term. I believe the 3 years of this settlement, the duration of which the country will largely be controlled by the United Nations, is a tremendous asset in terms of being able to rebuild the country and trying to get supplies in. Supplies haven't been going in for basically 15 years. So in the short term, it's very good. In long term, I have real reservations, and it's potentially quite frightening, given that the Khmer Rouge are the only real intellectual base for the country now. And if they take the middle-level government positions in bureaucracy, once the United Nations leave, irrespective of what the outcome is of an election, they ultimately are going to have the power to control the country.
Okay, Brian McConaghy, thanks a lot for sharing your observations with us.
Thank you.
And when we come back, a look at culture and the man of the 1990s. Can he be sensitive and fierce?